You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Hello, welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Its purpose is to dissect and discuss classic horror films, both old and the new ones that are coming up, and have a distinct pleasure of actually opening up a new avenue for our podcast listeners. So in this particular case, I'm going to be looking at the Ozploit screening, which is a collection of short films that will be screening over as part of the Sydney Underground Film Festival on Saturday, 15th of September at 2:30 p.m. Sandwiched in amongst those short films will be a particular film which is called House Guests, and I have the pleasure of talking with the director of that film, Tori Savage. Welcome aboard, Tori.
Thank you for having me.
So this is really cool. So I guess before we get talking about the film, and because I like listeners to kind of get a bit of a background of what the film is, but before we get to that, maybe a bit of background about who you are. And I know I'm just crowbarring that one in because that wasn't part of the questions that I fired to. So my question is this your first short film feature that you've been behind the camera for? And is this also the first time you've been selected for any of the film festivals out there to get some kind of recognition?
Yeah, I mean, when I went to university, I did a few sort of smaller projects that were just part of the course, but this is definitely the first sort of big thing that I wrote the script for, spent heaps of time on, and sort of, you know.
Yeah, wow. So with that in mind, so there was a second part to the question there, which I threw out, which was more about, is Sydney Underground Film Festival the first kind of area where you're actually able to showcase house guests?
I actually got into For Film's Sake back in April.
Yep.
Like the women-based one.
Yeah.
So this would be the second one.
Yeah, cool. So, and what kind of reception have you had so far? You know, I mean, I guess it's early days yet of kind of touting your film in the festival circuit, but what's been your general consensus on the feedback so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been going well. I got into that one, Sydney, Underground Sydney, and then I've also just been selected into Encounters Film Festival in Bristol.
Yes,
and I'm heading over to the UK in a couple of weeks to go do that one, which will be fun.
That'll be awesome. So sorry, that's Encounters, did you say?
Yeah, Encounters.
Yeah. I think I've heard of that one. I guess, we've been beating around the bush, but let's for those people that maybe kind of piquing their interest as we're talking about your film House Guests, how would you describe the film in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, I'd say it's about a couple that need to get away. The busy lives, and it sort of put a strain on their relationship. And because of that, they decide to head down to the country and stay at a homestay.
Okay.
And sort of when they arrive, they meet their host, and she's a bit odd. Yes. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, little quirky. So have there been? I'm going to jump to the next question, just about what inspired you with this particular story for House Guests. You know, you've written this and directed it, but so where did you go to get your inspiration? Was there? Did you go on a homestay with somebody, and that kind of then started to trigger this as, wouldn't it be interesting if?
Well, to be honest, it sort of arose from an insight on the fact that, you know, we book through Airbnb and Homestay and all those sorts of sites, but we don't really know anything about the people that we're staying with.
Yes.
Or who we're inviting into our homes. And so I just kind of thought that would be a cool idea for a horror story.
Yeah, totally. I fully, it's amazing. Maybe it has been explored before, but I'm not aware of it. I thought it was a really kind of unique look at that avenue, and because we are essentially kind of walking into the unknown with it, and we feel okay with that, that this is just part of the normal. We're spending some time at someone else's house, and yeah. Interesting. So, have there been any key influences, like are there directors that you have in mind, or famous films, or and what is it about the horror genre in general that drew you to creating a horror film for House Guests?
I mean, I think from even through my childhood, I've watched horror films my whole life, and that's obviously had some sort of impact on me.
Yeah.
But I think when considering the directors that have really influenced me, I'd say it's Quentin Tarantino, Wes Anderson, and Tim Burton. And I'd like to think that there's a little bit of all those three directors in House Guests.
Yeah.
And the way I sort of saw that was, it's like, the visceral imagery of Tarantino and the like very stylized framing of Anderson, and then sort of the tones of Burton, which I hope audiences can appreciate.
Yeah. I definitely see that now that you've mentioned that. I'm picturing particularly Wes Anderson, because the framing you choose is really interesting, and I did notice that in the film. So, and that you saying that kind of sparks in my mind. I'm like, yeah, that I can totally see the inspiration there coming through. So, obviously, as an Australian director, working in the horror genre, what challenges did you face in particular in trying to kind of get this film up and running?
To be honest, like, as I said sort of before, I love horror. And the biggest sort of thing that I faced was when developing the script for House Guests, people telling me not to go into horror and to focus on purposeful or more socially responsible sort of idea.
Yes.
I sort of thought, it's topical, the whole Airbnb thing, and it's ultimately a film's about entertaining people. And I think House Guest does that. So tenfold. I completely agree with that. So that's interesting as well. Like, I'm just wondering, like, from what you were saying about people trying to deter you away from horror, do you think your gender had anything to play with that? Because I mean, there are exceptions more recently, obviously, with Jennifer Kent's The Babadook and a few others that have kind of come to the forefront with female directors in that genre, but it's been so heavily associated with the male side of things. Do you think that had a part to play with? And how have you been able to? I mean, have you noticed a shift in the gender kind of world? It could have definitely been that sort of. I find a lot of people, when I've shown friends or colleagues the short film, they're like, oh, that's so unexpected. Like, there must be something, deep down inside you. It's a fun story. But it is sort of, people don't expect it to, I guess, come from it.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because in recent research, the gender skews more towards women going to see horror films as well. So you think that logic would say that a female director would be the perfect person to steer those audiences into enjoying the films. But there you go. I can't be one to judge that, and I'm not going to start opening up a big can of worms. So, do you think, though, that the recent rise in the horror mainstream aided you in getting House Guests noticed at all? Because obviously, we've had a good solid couple of years in the horror circuit at the moment. Do you think that aided you?
I mean, I definitely think just the rise in everyone sort of kind of loving this whole horror genre. That on one hand, and also the women gender issues being a real big thing at the moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So, like, it has been really interesting. I mean, I'm loving, I've been a fan, like yourself, been a fan of horror anyway for countless years. But I am kind of loving this. There's a little bit of homage to, like, 70s horror coming through, a lot of, like, big nods to Carpenter as well, more recently in the films that have been successful. It kind of speaks of our generation have kind of grown up with these auteurs, and they've kind of triggered us into open up a world of crazy imagination and our playground has become bigger for it. And it's great seeing like people like yourself actually kind of getting behind the camera and putting those visions and formatting them into these awesome short stories or feature-length films. One highlight of yours, and we were talking offline, but one big highlight of yours is the great cast that you have in House Guests, and then how they portray the characters within the story. And you already mentioned, there's a bit of a quirky character in there, and the two leads, the couple as well, also allow a lot of depth to their character as well. I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit about the casting involved, because they had to be quite particular in order for this to be pulled off.
Yeah, totally. I mean, as you just said, they were in an incredible cast, and I'm so lucky that they were so generous with their time, because it wouldn't have happened without them. But I think the most important thing for me was the fact that I researched for quite some time to find these cast members, and then once they came on board, we actually went into developing backstories for each character, and we had rehearsal days, and then when the shoot came along, it all just sort of perfectly worked, because we all understood what had to happen.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that also that I wrote and directed it helped me go, I know exactly what I want.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and one that hasn't been addressed, I think, in the past when I've spoken to people who have co-collaborated with the two hats on at the same time. Yeah. But it makes sense because you have created these characters from scratch. You know them inside and out, and I really like what you were saying about working on the backstory with the actors too, to develop these characters more. I come from a drama background myself, and in order to get hooked into a story, the characters have to be believable first. I'm a huge, this isn't horror related, which might shock or surprise some podcasters of our fans out there, but one of my favorite directors is Mike Leigh, a British director who spends years working with a group of actors in order to develop them and create these characters and these little mini worlds that he does before he then goes away and writes a script based on their workshopping to then generate these amazing films that he then directs. And the reason I like that is, as I said, I'm a huge character person, and that's why, as I said, House Guests really stood out to me, because you can see there's a lot of depth to each of the characters that are in play. Yeah. It was really, really cool. So now that House Guests is out there into the big wide world, is there anything that you would change or reconsider about the final product, or are you kind of okay to go, no, it's out there, I'm going to take my hands away before I go crazy and do something else with it? I
mean, I'd say, considering it was pretty much my first short film, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out.
Yeah.
But as I said before, it would not have been possible without the casting crew.
Yeah. Who
worked alongside with me. But, I mean, if I were to do something different, maybe making it longer so I could develop the characters even further and make the suspense even greater.
Yeah, sure. I can see that too as well, yeah. Obviously, House Guests is screening, as we said, as part of the Sydney Underground Film Festival within the Ozploit section, which is screening, as I mentioned, on Saturday, 15th September at 2:30 p.m. But what next is on your agenda? I mean, you talked about that you were going to be taking this House Guests on to another festival in the UK. Are you heavily in film festival circuit land at the moment, just to try and keep pushing this out there as much as you can? Are there other stuff in the pipeline? You mentioned obviously you write a lot as well, so are you writing stuff as well as trying to juggle everything else in order to get House Guests noticed? Where do you lie with what's next on your agenda?
Yeah, I think like in terms of house guests, definitely trying to push more for the festival circuit.
Yeah.
Because it's awesome to go see other people's work and network and just kind of develop your skills. But I think for in terms of future projects, I'm sort of working on a couple of scripts at the moment, but I'm also trying to develop myself in the commercial world of directing.
Okay, wow, yeah, sure. That's a whole different playing field, but yes.
Completely.
Cool. Well, look, that's about us, but I really wish you all the success. And as I've seen some of the short films, as I said, that's part of the screening for the Sydney Underground Film Festival, and there's some great talent out there. Have fun networking on the night, and just again a big reminder to people that are listening to the podcast: go down and check it out. Support your homegrown talent with people like Tori here, who's pushing out their film House Guests as part of the Sydney Underground Film Festival on Saturday, 15th September at 2:30 p.m. Thank you very, very much for your time, Tori. I really, really appreciate it. All the best.
Thank you for having me.
No worries.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.